morning, everybody, and welcome to the Stokastic MLB Strategy Show. Do me a favor, because it's my birthday. So and this is my actual birthday. This isn't a bit. This isn't me making fun of EMAC or Eric for being old in any way. It is actually my birthday today. I turned 32 years old. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. That is all I want for you guys for my birthday. And what would I rather be doing on my birthday than breaking down a 15-game baseball slate in the morning with Adam? Nothing I'd rather be doing. So, Adam, we've got a lot going on this slate. 15 games. We've got a lot of high-end pitchers. We've got a Coors Field game. How are you feeling about this 15-game slate?
I feel like it can't go worse than the last, week of baseball slates have gone for me. So I'm looking forward to that. And happy birthday. Congratulations on getting a show with me to kick it off.
Yeah.
I'm sure that was Chris Karen's gift to you.
It was, what's funny is because I realized it was a massive mistake this morning because I'm trying to put together the run. And I didn't realize it was going to be a 15-game slate on my birthday either. But I'm putting together the run sheet, and we have better processes for putting it together now. But when it's 15 games, it still takes time because I have to write out all the pitchers, I have to write out all their stats and everything. And then I've got like friends calling me to say happy birthday and stuff. And I don't want to be a dick, but like my mom is calling me right before I'm doing Mom, I can't talk right now. I have to write down what Justin Verlander's expected ERA is this year. So it's maybe a little bit of a misstep for not taking the morning off, but I think I'm going to go out to lunch with my brother after this. And I'm looking forward to it, looking forward to the day. And I am looking forward to talking about a 15-game baseball slate with you. And like I said, there's a lot of different spots to talk about. And we'll start right now by talking about the Atlanta Braves against the Pittsburgh Pirates. And, there are so many high-end pitchers on this slate that Max Fried almost kind of gets lost in the mix for me just because he doesn't have the same strikeout upside as some of these other guys. But he has a really good matchup against the Pittsburgh Pirates. He's projected for around 20% ownership. How are you going to approach him when he has a really good matchup against Pittsburgh, but maybe not the same strikeout upside as some of the other high-end pitchers today?
Yeah, it's always kind of tough with Fried because he's a really good real-life pitcher, and he's got solid strikeout stuff, but it's just that from a fantasy standpoint, he doesn't have that same level of strikeout stuff that some of these other guys do. But I still think that getting to him here looks pretty appealing. Good matchup against Pittsburgh, 22.5% strikeout percent, or basically 23% strikeout percentage for Fried this year, 3.06 xFIP. Still projects well. I have him right now. My spreadsheet is sorted terribly, but it looks like my fourth highest projected pitcher on DraftKings. So it's not like you're giving up a lot in the way of projection to get to him either. I expect to still get there. Right now on DraftKings, we have Fried getting 22% ownership, 14% chance of being a top two pitcher. He is a little bit less expensive than the rest of the other guys, though, so a little bit better top two value percentage as well. I think that ownership makes sense, and he looks like a pretty solid option here.
Yeah, I'll see what ends up happening with my lineups when I build them because, right now it does seem like there's going to be other pitchers I prioritize ahead of him. And I don't think I'm going to need the salary savings where he's, $1,000 to $500 cheaper than a lot of the other top end pitchers. So I think it's going to be one of the things by the time lineups roll around, there's just going to be so many hitters that look pretty good at like 2,200 or 2,400 that I'm just going to probably get up for Max Fried to the likes of Justin Verlander, Robbie Ray, Corbin Burns, Dylan Cease, etc. We'll see what happens later on in the day. I'm certainly not looking to stack Pittsburgh against them. But on the other side, JT Brubaker pitching for Pittsburgh. He's been decent this year, 4.24 expected ERA, 23.2% K rate. The Atlanta Braves, an offense that strikes out a bunch, but we do know they have a lot of power in the lineup. They are surprisingly projected to be one of the most popular offenses on the slate. I say surprisingly, just because Pittsburgh is in some crazy hitter-friendly park. JT Brubaker is solid, and there's so many spots on the slate. Does it surprise you that we've got the Braves as being one of the most popular offenses going today?
Not really. They're still just such a high upside offense that they're going to get there pretty frequently. And like you said with Brubaker, he's a solid pitcher, but it's not like he's great. 3.85 xFIP, 0.9 home runs allowed per 9 innings. So far this season against right-handed hitters, which is mostly the Braves lineup, he's only allowed a 128 expected ISO. That is really good. 22.3% strikeout percentage. So I get your points. It's also, I think, supposed to be in like the mid to upper 70s in Pittsburgh. So you're getting some cooler weather now. It's not like it's, the middle of summer anymore. But at the same time, the Braves are just such a ridiculously loaded offense. I mean, even when you go to the bottom of this offense and you have Vaughn Grisham and Michael Harris, those are guys that on other teams you would be talking about, like if they were on the Pirates, when you talk about the Pirates, you would be saying well, they all suck except for Brian Reynolds, Vaughn Grisham, and Michael Harris. On Atlanta, they're just like throw-ins where it's like, oh yeah, these guys at the bottom of the order are also really good.
The only teams projected for more ownership than Atlanta right now is the Kansas City Royals, very marginally 9.1% projected
Don't
aggregate
tell me
ownership
that.
to 9% for the Atlanta Braves, and then 14.8% ownership for the Texas Rangers, who playing in Coors Field. No surprise, and they come out as the most popular offense on the slate. If you guys want more access to all the tools we have over at Stokastic, like the top stacks tool, top pitchers tool, any kind of projections or ownership data, we've got it all covered. And if you're signing up for the first time, use the promo code MLB Strategy Show because it's going to get you 50% off your first week of a Stokastic Plus Platinum package. No reason to not save yourself some money when you sign up. So make sure to use that promo code. Stop guessing, start winning. Join Stokastic Plus today. Let's move to New York, where we have the Yankees taking on the Mets, Subway Series, and the pitchers on the mound. Starting with the Yankees, Frankie Montas, who has struggled immensely since coming to New York. So overall, his numbers for the year, not bad. 4.01 expected ERA, 23.8% K rate. But there's been some really rough starts for him. And it feels to me like the Yankees fans are going to start turning on Frankie Montas, kind of like what happened with Joey Gallo. But what do you make of what we've seen out of Montas since coming to New York? Because it has not been pretty.
Yeah, my first thought the other day when he had another rough start was that this was about to be Joey Gallo the second time. The only difference, and maybe they did, I know with Gallo, as soon as they traded for him, the Yankees fans just like lost their shit because they're too stupid to realize that strikeouts don't really matter, and Joey Gallo actually, at least to that point, was a very good hitter. With Montas, I'm not sure there was the same outrage about acquiring him, but like with Gallo, it just seemed like a completely self-fulfilling prophecy that he sucked in New York and the fans hated him. Not sure that they hated Montas out of the gate, but not sure how much longer his leash is going to be there with the fans either if he keeps pitching like he has been. But I'm not overly concerned about him. I mean, he's got a pretty long track record of just being a solid major league pitcher, 3.44 xFIP, 23.8% strikeout percentage overall this year. Not a particularly easy spot for him against the Mets, though.
Yeah, and it's going to make it hard to consider him that. And also, I think there's multiple compounding factors. Number one, he's going to New York, so there is more pressure to the situation. Maybe that's impactful. The other thing too is he was hurt for a while, so he gets hurt. He's getting ramped back up in Oakland, and all of a sudden, you got a pitcher who is hurt, was on a pitch restriction, is all of a sudden now thrown into really high leverage situations with the Yankees, and he might have just not been ready for that from a health standpoint. And then he's had some tough matchups: the Blue Jays at Boston, at St. Louis. This is obviously another really difficult matchup against the Mets. So are you going to look to stack against Montas at all? Because I do think there's a case that he's just not totally healthy right now.
Yeah, I think that's possible. And even if you want to assume that he is healthy, the Mets are getting virtually no ownership here. The issue that I think I'll have in getting to them, like I thought they were a good stack yesterday at their ownership, and I still had trouble getting there. And then today you basically double the number of games on the slate. And like I think the case for the Mets is that they are just a good offense, pretty much top to bottom. They have plenty of left-handed power in this lineup that's going into Yankee Stadium now between Nimmo, Lindor, Vogelbach, McNeil, Beatty. That's a lot of good left-handed bats that can take advantage of the short porch. But there's a lot of offenses on this slate that aren't facing a pitcher as good as Frankie Montas.
Yeah, the other thing that's funny too that people are bringing up in chat is the Yankees traded Jordan Montgomery for Dylan Carlson or not Dylan Carlson. Was it Harrison? I forget who
they traded. Yeah, it was Harrison Bader.
Yeah, Harrison Bader. So the Yankees traded Montgomery for Harrison Bader just because they didn't have a spot in the rotation for Montgomery after trading for Montas. And Montgomery's been so much better than Montas since that trade. So it certainly hasn't gone well to the Yankees for this point, and I can't really trust Frankie Montas until we start to see him really look healthy and start to pitch better. And it would help if he was in an easier matchup than the New York Mets also. But on the other side of the game, Taijuan Walker pitching for New York, the other New York team anyway, 4.18 expected ERA, 18.4% K rate. The Yankees also, not only has Frankie Montas struggled, the Yankees offense has generally struggled over the last few weeks. But is this a spot against Taijuan Walker where we could see more upside again from the Yankees offense?
I think so. I mean, Walker's just kind of a middle of the road pitcher. This is a situation where, again, like I don't know that I get to the Yankees a ton just because there are so many offenses on this slate, but we do have them with a 4% chance of being the top stack, 3.5% aggregate ownership. I haven't double checked. I'm double checking now, but I assume most of that ownership is just because Aaron Judge is ridiculously good. Yeah. Aaron Judge getting twice as much ownership as any other hitter on the Yankees at 12.5%. Benintendi's at 6%, Rizzo at 3%, everyone else 2% or less. So it's virtually an unowned Yankee stack outside of Aaron Judge. That's never a bad spot to be at. Walker is just kind of a decent pitcher, but certainly can get blown up. Only has a 16.7% strikeout percentage against righties this year, 21.4 against lefties, about a 150 expected ISO to righties, 160 to lefties. So certainly a high upside spot for the Yankees. Not a spot that I look at it and just say, I'd be really surprised if they don't light up Taijuan Walker. He's not bad, but very high upside spot. Not much ownership going here outside of Aaron Judge.
Yeah, Walker's really not been bad this year. A little bit of luck involved, 282 BABIP, 76.1% strand rate, but still, it's a guy who, rightfully should have like an ERA low fours, high threes. And in terms of actual pitchers to pick on, there's better spots. The Yankees in large field tournaments are worth some consideration, I think, just because they're the Yankees, but it's not one of the primary targets for me today. Next game to talk about here, Cincinnati Reds, Philadelphia Phillies. Nick Lodolo has been an interesting fantasy pitcher this year. Young prospect with a ton of strikeout upside. So he is a 20.8%, 28.7% K rate this year to go along with a 4.07 expected ERA. I know the Phillies don't present the easiest matchup in the world, but is Nick Lodolo a pitcher you have your eye on just because of how good the strikeout stuff has been?
The strikeout stuff is really good. The biggest issue, I think, with Lodolo on this slate is that he is 9K. So you're not really getting much of a discount off of, for example, Max Fried against the Pirates. I know Lodolo's got a better strikeout percentage, but at this point in their careers, at least, Fried, I think, is still the better pitcher overall. Lodolo, 3.8 xFIP to go with his 28.7% strikeout percentage, but he does also have a 10.5% walk percentage. He's allowed 1.15 home runs per 9 innings. He's going up against a Phillies team that does have plenty of power in their lineup in Philadelphia. So if you wanted to get to Lodolo in some tournament lineups just for the upside at 3%, I think that's fine. But, I don't think he should be 1/10 the ownership of Max Fried. But if you're just talking about those two players, but realistically, when you're talking about evaluating an entire lineup that you build, I think it's much more likely that I'm able to just say yeah, okay, cool. I'm going to go to Max Fried here against the Pirates instead.
Yeah, and one thing that is kind of interesting about Lodolo as well is it looks like, at least if we're just looking at the betting lines as an indicator, they're expecting a lot of runs to be scored by the Phillies. Phillies implied team total of nearly 5 runs, one of the highest marks on the slate. So as a result, we look at Philly today and they're projected to be, not crazy popular, picking up ownership at 3.6%. So, comparable with like the Yankees and way more than the Mets are getting against Frankie Montas. I'm not overly interested in stacking against Lodolo just because I do think he's been pretty solid.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I still think that there's some upside here just because you are talking about a young pitcher. He's highly regarded, but still a young pitcher facing a team that does have a lot of power. But he has done a good job so far this year. Only a 139 expected ISO to righties, 323 expected WOBA. He's actually seemingly run pretty bad against right-handed bats. 397 BABIP against righties so far. That's unbelievably high. 158 actual ISO is about 20 points higher than the expected. 368 WOBA is about 45 points higher than his expected. So I do think he's had some bad luck there. And he does have the 28.3% strikeout percentage. The case for the Phillies would be that Alec Boehm is still 4,200. He has certainly figured out how to hit after a slow start to his major league career. You have Hoskins at 4,600, which is certainly a reasonable price tag. Same goes for Castellanos and Segura at their respective salaries. So I do think that there's a pretty high ceiling in this park for Philadelphia, but their ownership also is pretty much in line with their top stack percentage.
Yeah, that's where I'm at with them. Probably other teams in this ownership range that I'd rather get to. And pitching for the Philadelphia Phillies, Ranger Suarez is on the mound, and another guy who he's pretty expensive, right? So I understand that he's got a really good matchup against the Cincinnati Reds, but at the same time, too, a 20.2% K rate for Ranger Suarez when he's 9,200 on both FanDuel and DraftKings. It's hard for me to pay that much for a pitcher with this minimal strikeout upside when there are so many other good pitching options on the slate. But is the matchup enough to sway you otherwise?
No, not really.
Yeah. So in terms of ownership right now, 5% going to Ranger Suarez. This isn't saying much, but 5% on FanDuel. DK is at 11.6%. Like, this is where I'd rather roster somebody like a Nick Lodolo. Like, I'd rather play Lodolo at 2% ownership than Suarez at 12. Ultimately, do I get to either of them? Good chance I don't. But Ranger Suarez being 5% owned on FanDuel and 12% on DK, I'd rather get elsewhere at this price point.
Yeah, I agree. 9,200, again, it's a good matchup against the Reds. I understand why he's getting some ownership here. He is getting half the ownership of Fried, so that's reasonable. Like, we have Fried with a 14% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. Suarez is about 10.5%. Doesn't quite warrant double the ownership, but I do still prefer Fried.
All right, let's talk about your Baltimore Orioles next. We're going up against Dylan Cease, currently just behind Justin Verlander in terms of the futures odds in the AL Cy Young market. And Cease has been really good this year, especially in the strikeout department, a 32.3% K rate, and then also is one of the lower ERAs in baseball. So he's going to be a popular pitching option today against the Orioles. I understand why. And even if he gives up a couple of runs, the strikeout stuff is usually enough to offset it. That and he's only had one start since the middle of May where he's given up more than one earned run in an outing. So compared to the other high-end pitchers on the slate, where does Dylan Cease fit into the mix for you?
I think he looks really good here, especially because he's only getting 15% ownership. He's less expensive than Rodon. He's less expensive than Verlander and Burns. The matchup against Baltimore is okay. It's certainly not as good as Rodon's matchup against the Tigers, but it's better than Burns' matchup against the Dodgers and Verlander's against the Twins. And Cease is really, really good. Highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 32.3%, 3.2 xFIP, 0.75 home runs per nine. The only thing you can point to with Cease as an issue as far as his pitching goes is the 10.5% walk percentage. But when you are striking out guys like he does and you're able to limit power like he does, that's not that big of a deal. The Orioles lineup is likely to be pretty balanced between lefties and righties, a little top heavy towards lefties. Cease has struck out 28.5% of lefties this year, which obviously is still very good. It's not as good as his 36% strikeout percentage against righties, but you're kind of just nitpicking there. So at current ownership, I actually really like Dylan Cease because I don't, at least from a ceiling standpoint, like a range of outcome standpoint, I don't think he's drastically different than any of the other pitchers on the slate that are getting twice as much ownership.
Yeah, and then you also look at some of these other pitchers, and it's not. I get that the Orioles' offense has a lot of young talent, and it's been better as of late. But it's not like I look at the matchup against Baltimore, which has also been a much more pitcher-friendly ballpark this year, and think like, oh, I have to stay away from it. Like I think you could say that. Do you think Verlander's matchup against the Twins is considerably better than Cease's matchup against the Orioles? Because Verlander's nearly twice the ownership of Cease, and Cease has more upside from a strikeout perspective, and he's cheaper. So the only thing I could think that people are looking at is the matchup, and I don't think Baltimore's that difficult of a matchup compared to a team like the Twins.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. And I do think it's interesting, like looking at my early projections, I have Verlander 2 DraftKings points ahead of Cease. On the Stokastic website, we have Verlander 1.5 fantasy points ahead of Cease. I have a hard time explaining why that is. It's a spot, I've said it on shows before, like I'm always going to just go with the numbers over what I personally believe because I'm not that smart. But I have a really hard time actually explaining why that is, outside of probably just Verlander having, a very long track record of being elite and Cease taking that step forward. But when you're a prospect, when you had the prospect status and the pedigree that Dylan Cease did and does, I'm not looking at his huge step forward this year and saying like, oh, well, he's going to regress back to what he was as a rookie. Like, why would you think that? So I have a really hard time actually articulating like why one should like Justin Verlander more than Dylan Cease, even though that's what the projections look like right now.
Yeah, and then like we've said, in terms of ownership, Verlander is quite a bit more popular right now, 25% on DK to 15% on DK. And then on FanDuel, we got Verlander at 11% ownership, Cease at 5%. So, both sides right around double the ownership for Verlander. And, even the cases we just laid out there, we're saying the projections of Verlander slightly ahead. It's not enough of a gap, even if we just trust the projections as is, that Verlander should be nearly double the ownership of Cease. So that's a really good pivot for me in large field tournaments. And then as far as the White Sox offense goes, they've been massively disappointing on a lot of slates, certainly basically whenever I've played them. Matchup today against Austin Voth, 4.04 expected ERA, 21.2% K rate. Are the White Sox a team that you think you're going to be getting to tonight?
I don't think I'll get to much. I am a pretty big Austin Voth truther since he came to the Orioles. They have made him better. He has said, he did an interview not too long ago where he said basically, because he was in the Nats bullpen early this year. He was awful. They DFA'd him or whatever, and he ended up on the Orioles. And he said the Orioles basically just presented him with like a bunch of data that he didn't even know existed and just completely changed things and fixed him, which as an Orioles fan has been fantastic to hear because it used to be the other way around. But as a starter this year, which is essentially his time with the Orioles, 22.5% strikeout percentage, 3.82 xFIP, 3.28 FIP, 2.76 ERA, 6.4% walk percentage, well below a home run per 9 innings. I don't think this guy is a bad pitcher at all. And the White Sox, I really don't know what to make of them as an offense. If you look at the names in their lineup, they should be good, but they really just have been average to below all season long. But yeah, this is a spot where I think that just the name Austin Voth and looking at like his overall body of work as a major league pitcher leads you to believe it's a good matchup. I really don't think it is.
6,300 on DK as an SP2. FanDuel, I don't really think we need to consider Voth because it's a single pitcher site and he's 7,600. So a little bit bigger of a price tag. But considering what you just said about Voth, 6,300, is that a viable SP2 in large field tournaments?
I doubt that it's really necessary, but I would say it's viable in that if you need to go down there, I think he's more talented than a $6,300 pitcher.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's a good way to look at it. At the very least, something to keep an eye on for future slates. Maybe we get a smaller, 8-9 game slate where Voth is pitching and he's really low owned. And if he keeps pitching to the numbers like you just mentioned during his time in Baltimore, I think that's something that could definitely interest me in the future.
Yeah, and one thing to keep in mind with him too, from a DFS standpoint, I'm double checking it now, but I know it was the case for a long time. Baltimore doesn't have a particularly long leash on him generally. Yeah, I mean, 86 pitches, 80 pitches his last 2 times out, so that's actually been good. But a lot of times you see him kind of just get to 5 innings and they're like, all right, cool, we got 5 innings out of him, let's get to the good bullpen. So that's one thing too that's sort of caps that DFS ceiling. Is Baltimore's not typically going in the game saying like, all right, let's see how much we can get out of Voth today. But from an actual, like when he's on the mound, I think he's actually a pretty good pitcher.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. And just given what you said about Austin Voth, I'm going to kind of have him earmarked just to keep an eye on what happens with him going forward and keeping that information in the back of my mind that you just shared. Next game, San Francisco Giants, Detroit Tigers. We got another really high-end starting pitcher, Carlos Rodon, who's working his way back into the NL Cy Young pitcher because Sandy Alcantara has kind of struggled a little bit as of late and has a bunch of really tough matchups upcoming. So all of a sudden, some guys like Carlos Rodon, Corbin Burns, all of a sudden maybe a little more live for the Cy Young than it appeared a couple of weeks ago. But Rodon against the Detroit Tigers today, 2.76 expected ERA, 31.7% K rate. He is currently the pitcher that we have with the best odds of being the top scoring pitcher on the slate going up against Detroit. Does that make sense to you? Is Rodon the number one guy to be paying up for today with nothing really else considered, just looking at overall production?
It's a little great. So, I mean, I think that like from a projection standpoint, it's between him and Robbie Ray as far as the top projected guys. Good matchup for Rodon, plenty of strikeouts for the Tigers. He's a really good pitcher. I'm not completely sold on just paying $11K for him when you can pay $10K for Ray or $10K for Cease, but I do think he certainly warrants ownership and is one of the top projected guys on the slate.
Currently projected for 28% ownership on DK, and then over on FanDuel projected for 15%. Also, a little bit more aggressive pricing from DraftKings. Not anything crazy. Still only 11K. It's not going to be all that hard to get up to him. But still, we actually have signed kind of some decisions to make at the high end of the pricing as opposed to just being like, hey, every best starting pitcher on the slate is 94, 9,800. I do think the price point on Rodon is probably going to drive me a little bit more towards guys like Cease and Robbie Ray, where I'm getting an actual $1,000 price discount.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like if you have, because I mean, the one thing in baseball is like you're going to have some stacks that just aren't that expensive or whatever. If you can find $1,000 to get from Cease to Carlos Rodon, then fine. But I just think in a lot of lineups, I'm probably going to like the ceiling a little bit more if I'm just like, oh, okay, well, I have Carlos Rodon here, but I can upgrade this hitter or these 2 hitters and go from him to Cease or to Ray, who I think also give me a massive ceiling.
Yeah, we'll see what happens when I build lineups, but I have a feeling I'm just going to end up getting to more of guys like Robbie Ray and Dylan Cease than Carlos Rodon. Definitely no interest in stacking against him. But what are we going to do with the San Francisco Giants offense today? Everybody knows about the pinch hit risk at this time of the year, but they have a good matchup against Drew Hutchison. 5.16 expected ERA. He does not generate swing and misses either at a 14.6% K rate. Are the Giants one of the offenses you want to be getting to on this slate?
So the pinch hit risk obviously is very annoying with the Giants. I don't worry about it quite as much when they're facing right-handed pitching because most of their best hitters are left-handed. And so I think it's less of a guarantee that you're going to get them pinch hit for. Like Lamont Wade certainly still carries plenty of risk, but he's also extremely inexpensive. And then also teams typically just don't have as many left-handed relievers in their bullpen as they do righties. So it's more difficult for them to match up later in the game and force those pinch hitting opportunities. Looking at the Tigers bullpen, looks like they have 2 lefties, Gregory Soto and Chafin. I'm not positive. I think Soto's their closer.
Yeah, Gregory Soto is their closer this year, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so like if that's the case, you're talking about having, he has 23 saves. So at least for most of the year, he's been the closer. So you're talking about essentially having one lefty out there that they can use to force pinch hitters. So I don't think it's as much of a risk when you're getting them against a right-handed pitcher. So it does make them look good. It's a nice park upgrade as well. Detroit, not great for home runs, but it is a park where typically you see, at least historically, average exit velocities being higher than average. Really good batter's eye, easy to pick up the ball. And Drew Hutchison's not very good. So I think the Giants look pretty good here.
All right, let's hit on the next game. Tampa Bay Rays, Los Angeles Angels. And, for the longest time, we were picking on the Angels a whole bunch. Like, pitcher strikeout totals were really inflated going up against the Angels. Things are a little bit different now because Mike Trout is back in the mix. It doesn't make them one of the best offenses in baseball, but it goes from making them maybe like the second worst offense against right-handed pitching to more like bottom five-ish type territory. So there is a difference with Mike Trout back in the mix. Corey Kluber on the mound for Tampa Bay, 3.9 expected ERA, 21.7% K rate. It's hard for me to back Corey Kluber in any kind of significant way on this slate because, at least in part, Mike Trout is back, but there's also just other pitching options I get to. I definitely don't want to roster the Angels against him, but there's nothing I really find too appealing about this side of the game.
No, I mean, I think Kluber at 7,700 is reasonable. He's getting 13% ownership. That's sort of just where I assumed it would come in. It is still a good matchup here. Ohtani also is a question mark. Like, he didn't play yesterday after leaving his start early with an illness 2 games ago. So maybe he doesn't play again today, which would certainly be a bump for Kluber. They only have a 3 implied run total. He's not a great strikeout pitcher, but he's not horrible. 21.7% strikeout percentage, 3.77 xFIP, doesn't walk guys. So I still think that if you need a mid-range pitcher, he looks pretty good, but not somebody that I'm expecting to like build 30% of my lineups around or anything.
Yeah, also I don't even know if I'd call it a conspiracy theory, but I don't think Ohtani's 100% healthy. Like, I don't think he's injured, but I think he's a little bit banged up at this point of the year. His pitching has just not been great over the last month. His velocity was way down the last start. I know they removed him and they called it an illness. I just think there's something just not totally correct with him right now. So I did forget that he might not be in the lineup today. So that is a point that's taken as well. If he isn't in there, that would be a pretty big boost to Corey Kluber because this team is so thin on depth. Like, anybody who's coming in as a replacement player for Mike Trout or Shohei Ohtani, it's a terrible hitter that strikes out a lot.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not to say that Ohtani and Trout don't strike out a lot too, but they're at least really, really good hitters. But yeah, like, basically whenever one of those guys gets replaced, it's just by somebody who strikes out as much, if not more, and can't actually hit.
Yeah, and then starting for the Angels, Jose Suarez is on the mound, and Suarez this year, he's been pretty decent, and I think the matchup against the Rays probably a little bit easier than most people would realize. The Rays, so many injuries this year. It's not a great offense at this point. 4.07 expected ERA for Jose Suarez, 22.6% K rate. At really low ownership, I don't think he's a terrible option to save salary with. I ultimately just think it's going to kind of be unnecessary. I don't want to stack the Rays against him. Jose Suarez, if you absolutely needed to save salary, I'd kind of put him in that same boat as like an Austin Voth, where I think I can make a case for it. But ultimately, by the time I build lineups, I'm probably not going to get there.
Yeah, I was going to say right now I have the exact same projection on Suarez that I do Austin Voth. So, and it's basically like a 2x the salary projection. So, like, he looks good from a point per dollar standpoint, but from a am I actually going to need him standpoint, the answer is probably not.
Yeah, same page there. Next game, we have the Boston Red Sox against the Toronto Blue Jays, and Josh Winkowski pitching for Boston. I just haven't been impressed with him this year. He was an unranked prospect, doesn't have great stuff. He's come up, and there was points in times where he found a little bit of success at the big league level, but it was totally luck-based, and he's a 13.5% K rate now to go along with a 4.73 expected ERA. I'm looking at the Toronto Blue Jays as being a team that's going to be a primary stack for me because not only do I think they have a lot of upside against Winkowski, they're not overly popular, projected for 5.8% ownership on the slate right now. So Toronto, definitely a team that's going to be in consideration as being my single entry team for the day, and then a team I want to be overweight to in large field tournaments. Blue Jays, is that a team you like as well?
Yeah, right now that ownership's looking pretty appealing at 6%, 9% chance of being the top stack. I will throw out the typical caveat that a trend we've seen a lot this year is that on these Coors Field slates, the visiting team in Coors that's projected for a ton of ownership ends up being a little bit lower than projected. And then as a result, the second team that's projected to be under-owned ends up being closer. But I think that might be a little bit different on this slate just because the Texas projected ownership is more in check than You know, like when we were getting teams projected for 30% ownership and they were coming in at 20%. We have them at 15%. So, I mean, maybe they come in a little bit lower and that trend still holds, but I don't expect it to be as drastic as we've seen on some of those other slates. Winkowski, certainly not a pitcher that I'm going to be shying away from with Blue Jays bats. 144 expected ISO to righties is pretty solid as far as limiting power, but only a 14.7% strikeout percentage for Winkowski against right-handed hitters. And these are a lot of above average right-handed hitters that are pretty likely to be able to do some damage.
Yeah, I mean, the Blue Jays, if the slate started right now, this is the team I'd be playing in single entry, mostly because I think the offense is really good. I don't think Winkowski is particularly good, and the ownership is modest. It's not like crazy ownership. We have the second best top stack odds on the slate, only behind the Texas Rangers. So I really like the Toronto Blue Jays. I doubt that's going to change as we get on later in the day. And then pitching for Toronto, Ross Stripling. He's been decent this year, 3.56 expected ERA, 20.9% K rate. So when it comes to the Boston Red Sox, it's an offense that's definitely had its struggles this year, more so than expected. They've got 3% projected ownership. It's going to be hard for me to prioritize them because Stripling really has pitched decently this year, and there's a lot of not great pitchers to look at on this slate.
Yeah, that's where I'm at as well. 106 expected ISO to lefties for Stripling this year, 152 to righties. You're never wrong for getting to somebody like Devers or paying 3,500 for Verdugo, but on a slate of this size, I think there's going to be more appealing spots to go to. And I did see it mentioned in chat. This is the one game right now that looks like it does have some potential weather concerns. Obviously, don't need to get bogged down in those at 11:30 in the morning, but just keep that in mind if you happen to be somebody that's trying to like build lineups and then also work. And don't forget to look at the weather.
Yeah, it's we haven't had that many weather rainouts this year, surprisingly. Like it's been much less. We've had games, last night there was games that delayed, but they played without issue. But yeah, there's been very, very few rain spots this year compared to previous seasons, which has been nice. If this is a consequence of global warming, I'm all for it. If it means less baseball games getting rained out somewhere, fuck the environment. I want my baseball games to play. So
I've also gotten a lot of, it seems like every other day, just like really massive thunderstorms I get to watch out my window. So that's been cool.
Yeah, and then the baseball games play because it's
right, like, exactly. Hey, the thunderstorm clears out and then the game plays.
Yeah, we've got a good situation going right now. Next game, Cardinals, Cubs. And for the Cardinals, it looks like this is going to be a bullpen game. So from a pitching standpoint, there's not that much to talk about. But a bullpen game for the Cardinals also probably means I'm not going to have that much interest in the Cubs. Also, because I generally don't have that much interest in the Cubs as a stack unless they're at Wrigley and it's some win game or they're just going up against a really terrible pitcher. But the Cubs, this looks like a spot I'm probably going to be staying away from them. And then something else to keep in mind, this is the tail end of a doubleheader. So second game of the day, it could mean weird lineup. So just pay attention to what those lineups look like. It could have a pretty big impact for what the viability of stacks are in this game. And then also just what the Vegas totals and what the team projections look like.
Yeah, it also looks like it's supposed to be like low to mid 70s in Chicago, wind not blowing out. So not any real strong case I can make for the Cubs. Woodford was starting at AAA this year, but most recently he's been working out of the bullpen for the Cubs. Pitched on the 21st, went like an inning and a third. So certainly not expecting him to go very deep into this game. The Cubs do have some power in their lineup, but they've also typically been pretty expensive recently, and there's a lot of good offenses on this slate.
Yeah, and then pitching for Chicago, it is going to be Adrian Sampson on the mound. And as of right now, we have the Cardinals rating out pretty well as a top stack. They have the third highest top stack odds, only behind Texas and Toronto. Modest ownership at 4.5%. The one thing I said that once again we have to take note of is what's the lineup going to look like? It is the second part of a doubleheader. It wouldn't be crazy to think Goldschmidt, Arenado, or other key players are out of the lineup because, they might not want to play them 2 games in one day. So I don't know exactly what to make of the Cardinals here either until we get more information on what their lineup is.
Yeah, agreed. And as far as just, talking Adrian Sampson, he's actually been reasonably decent this year. He has a lot of 170 expected ISO to righties, but that comes with a 24.4% strikeout percentage as well. Overall, an 18.9% strikeout percentage, 4.36 xFIP, 0.84 home runs per 9. He's not a good enough pitcher that I go out of my way not to take hitters against him, but he did also, I think, kind of improve when he went to, I believe it was the KBO. He had been someone that in his previous major league stint, I absolutely did try and take hitters against as often as I could. Seems to have improved. Still somebody where if the Cardinals do run out their A lineup, you can obviously get to guys like Goldschmidt and Arenado and not worry about it, but not a total gas can either.
Yeah, I was actually a little surprised because in the back of my head, I think of Adrian Sampson as being really bad, but I don't remember the numbers of every starting pitcher in the league. And I was recording or writing the numbers down, and I kind of did a double take on Adrian Sampson. I was like, really? A 3.61 expected ERA? And then I looked at his numbers and was thinking the same thing, like, oh, he's really not been that bad. So this could be a spot where the Cardinals, also much better team against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching. Albert Pujols is probably not going to be in the lineup because it's a right-hand pitcher where he's destroyed lefties this year. So it is generally a Cardinals team that I prefer against lefties than righties. And Sampson maybe a little bit underrated at this point.
Yeah, and to your point about why you remember him being bad, 5 games in 2018 with the Rangers, 6.52 expected ERA. 35 games with the Rangers in 2019, 6.41 expected ERA. Then he went to the KBO. We got to enjoy that during COVID. And then he came back to the Cubs last year, 4.95 expected ERA. And then this year he's at 3.61. So he went from being extremely bad to badish to now maybe even kind of good.
Yeah, definitely been a solid pitcher, which we'll see what happens with the Cardinals lineup. It seemed that the good chance I don't really end up getting to them all that much. Shout out to Prize Picks, the sponsor of today's show. And don't forget, if you're signing up at Prize Picks for the first time, make sure to use that promo code AWESEMO. It's going to get you up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. And if you're building a player prop card over at Prize Picks, some of the tools that we have over on the Stokastic site, because we have our player props tool where you can look at the projections for all the individual pitchers, and you can see the percentage odds of each prop winning or losing. So the overs or unders, got projected ROIs for that. Also, go check out OddsShopper, free tool to use, and you can look at that as a reference point also for looking at all the best odds at different sports books. But when it comes to Prize Picks, we've got all the different tools over at Stokastic that are going to help you build winning player prop cards. And then also one more time, don't forget to sign up using that promo code AWESEMO to get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. And there's no reason to not want to start your account out with some free money. All right, let's get into the rest of the games on the slate. And the next one is the Minnesota Twins against the Houston Astros. We have another high-end pitcher to talk about. It is Justin Verlander, who has just been insane this year. 2.89 expected ERA, 25% K rate. He has been one of the best pitchers in baseball and really one of the most improbable comeback stories I can remember. At 39 years old, coming off Tommy John surgery, getting right back to being one of the best pitchers in baseball. The spot against the Twins, I wouldn't call it the easiest matchup on the slate, but at the same time, too, Verlander has been as good as it gets. Very rarely has bad starts. So maybe not my favorite pitcher on the slate, but definitely somebody who's going to be rostered by me in large field tournaments.
Yeah, and it's also unlikely that you get Byron Buxton in the lineup for the Twins tonight, so that's a nice bump for Verlander as well. Obviously, take some strikeouts out, but you're also taking just a phenomenal bat out of the lineup, assuming that he doesn't play because he left yesterday's game early, obviously has a very long history of injuries. So that does weaken the lineup a bit overall. It's still a good lineup. Like, Luis Arraez is very difficult to strike out. The lineup as a whole doesn't have a ton of strikeouts. You have a lot of good hitters, but as you were saying, Verlander's been very good this year. Only a 25% strikeout percentage. Like, if you're gonna nitpick, that's the issue. Is just that he doesn't give you the same sort of strikeout stuff that Cease, Burns, Carlos Rodon, Robbie Ray, even Nick Lodolo do. But still a good pitcher. He's gonna be allowed to work pretty deep into games. So, I still think he's a good play. To kind of what we talked about earlier. He does project better than Cease, but I still don't hate the idea of getting to a little bit more Cease in tournaments as long as he's going to be lower owned.
Yeah, and for right now, like you said, we've got Cease. If you guys missed the top of the show, current ownership projections, Cease on both FanDuel and DraftKings, nearly half the ownership of Justin Verlander. If that's the case, it's going to hard for me to not prefer Dylan Cease with the lower ownership and then also the salary savings we're getting from him. Starting for the Minnesota Twins, Aaron Sanchez, who there was a point in time where he was a really well-regarded prospect, but he's had a number of injuries. He doesn't have the same stuff he did when he was younger, and he's just never really produced good results. So a 4.83 expected ERA for Aaron Sanchez to go along with a 14.7% K rate. We haven't talked about too many offenses we love on this slate. The Houston Astros are going to be one of them for me. Relatively modest 5% ownership, and I really like the matchup.
Yeah, I agree. Houston is a really good offense, 5.3 implied run total. Aaron Sanchez, not a ton of time in the majors this year, but unlikely to be particularly good. 14.7% strikeout percentage so far. I will certainly take my chances on these Astros bats. And then daily reminder that if Trey Mancini is in the lineup, he is playing in a park that is custom made for where he hits fly balls.
Yeah, and then also, Aaron Sanchez is going to put the ball in play. Is just not somebody who's generated strikeouts, and something I talk about a lot. If you get a powerful offense against a pitcher that is not able to generate swing and misses, it's so much harder to rely on BABIP block against, say, like the Houston Astros than it is a team like the Detroit Tigers or the Kansas City Royals. The Astros are going to make those pitchers pay more often than not, and that's showing their 5.3 implied team total. So Houston Astros, definitely a team that I'm looking to get to today. And then also, I know there were some concerns about Yordan Alvarez a couple days ago. He's fine. There was do you know what that weird situation was?
I wasn't listening to you.
Oh, okay, fair fair enough. So we had the other day, Yordan Alvarez left a game midway through, and then he missed a game after that. It was because he was having breathing issues from like pyrotechnics. Like he inhaled some of the smoke and he was having a breathing issue. So we thought it was a health situation. He ended up leaving the game with EMTs and he was fine. They were just like,
Okay,
oh,
I'd seen he went to the hospital, and then I didn't see anything else about it.
Yeah, it was like fireworks after a home run, and he inhaled some of the smoke. And so he thought he was having some like breathing issue. And they were just like, no, it was the pyrotechnics. So no concerns about Yordan Alvarez moving forward. That was the point I was making when we were, and I do the same thing, arguing with people in chat. We all love steroids around here. I know there's going to be somebody who I'll be like 10 years from now. I'm going to be people looking at me as a little skinny guy now. I get older. I'm going to start juicing up. We're going to get bigger out here. I'll be on TRT. It's going to be good times. Next game, Kansas City Royals, Arizona Diamondbacks. Two pretty shitty pitchers in this game, Zach Davies and Jonathan Heasley. One thing that's interesting about Zach Davies is that while he's certainly not good, I'm surprised that this many people are getting to the Royals on this slate right now, because it's not like they have a great offense either. We have them the 2.7% chance to be the top scoring team on the slate, and they're projected for 9.1% ownership. One of the most popular offense in both DraftKings and FanDuel today. I get it's a good matchup against Zach Davies. I can't get to the Royals this much, though.
I mean, I get to them on every slate, including in bad matchups. So I'm hoping maybe the ownership keeps me off of them today, just because I'm tired of playing them. But the case that I would make for Kansas City is like they haven't been good offensively, but they do have guys that should be good offensively. They have a lot of good hitting prospects here. Vinny Pasquantino's hurt, so that does really weaken this lineup. But you still have MJ Melendez with catcher outfield eligibility. Bobby Witt, third base and shortstop, makes him easy to get to. Perez is always one of the best catcher options. Michael Massey is basically 2K at second base. Nick Prado is a top 100 hitting prospect with multi-position eligibility at the salary minimum. So, and you're facing a pitcher in Davies who isn't particularly good, has only struck out 12.5% of lefties this year. So I understand why people are getting to Kansas City. I do think it's a good spot. I'm just really hoping that for once I don't end up jamming them in, because that's just getting really tiring.
The other thing that's weird too, they have a 4.4 implied team total. Like, it's not some crazy high number. And this is the second most popular offense on a 15-game slate. Every single team to choose from. I think it's a good spot for the Royals. Or should they be the second most popular offense on the slate? I don't think so.
Right. It's just a combination of like, it's a good spot and they're really cheap. So like you can stack. I haven't built lineups yet, but I'm pretty confident you can stack Kansas City, get to like Robbie Ray and Carlos Rodon, and then round it out with some other cheap bats.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm sure we can, but given the pricing of DraftKings, I have a feeling I could do that with better stacks as well. Like I'll probably be able to do that with the Astros also. What are the Astros prices? Oh, whatever. I'm not gonna start building lineups now, but yeah, I mean, generally, I found that I've been able to do that with most teams anyway. But
yeah, especially on slates of this size, you can just find cheap hitters to round out whatever lineup you need.
Yeah, I remember a slate, maybe it was like 2 weeks ago, where I was able to stack the Dodgers, and then my pitchers in my primary stack, my single entry was like Scherzer and Rodon and a Dodgers stack was my lineup, and it was like, this is the dumbest thing ever. I know the pitching pricing is a little bit better today, but I still don't think it's going to be that hard to go like Cease, Robbie Ray, and then high-end stack. So I don't think I'm going to need to get to the Royals when they're this popular. We'll see what happens later in the day when lineups roll out. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out the deeper dive, check out the live before lock. And once the lineups come out and we actually have a better idea of what some of the stuff we're building looks like, we'll know if some of these chalk spots are really warranted or not. Right now, my feeling is no on the Royals. Maybe that changes later in the day.
One other thing to point out with KC, and this just goes back to, I think, partly why I end up rostering them as frequently as I do. We have them with a relatively low top stack percentage, and so it makes it look like they're going really overowned. But that multi-position eligibility, if you look at like actual optimal percentages of each player, they're actually going to be higher than the top stack percentage suggests, because you can play so many of them at multiple positions. So that's one thing that I think sort of like makes the top stack percentage in their case a little bit misleading. Not to say that they're not overowned, but they're probably not as overowned as 3% to 9% suggests.
Yeah, I think that's also reasonable. And we've got a pretty shitty pitcher on the mound for the Royals in this game as well. Jonathan Heasley, 6.11 expected ERA, 16.5% K rate. So I look at a spot for the Arizona Diamondbacks here, who are actually the favorite in this game against the Royals. And I think that Heasley is worse than Zach Davies. And it's not because I think Davies is good. It's just I think Heasley is that bad. And I think that the Arizona Diamondbacks are a team that might be getting a little bit overlooked by the field at about 4.5% projected ownership, because I really do like this spot against Heasley. I don't think the Diamondbacks are good by any means, but I really just think Heasley's that bad.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the Diamondbacks, like, they're not good, like you said, but they do have some solid hitters in there. Kettle Marte is expensive, but he's good. Christian Walker has plenty of power. Dalton Varsho has some power. Carson Kelly's not a bad catcher option at his price tag. Alec Thomas probably towards the bottom of the order, so that's frustrating because we had been getting him at the top for a while. Josh Rojas is solid as well with multi-position eligibility. So it's not like it's an awful team. Like, it's not the Reds or the Pirates or something where, you know, you're really limited to the guys that you would actually want to get to. They are a little bit expensive, and that probably does keep the ownership down a bit. But I agree with you on Heasley, just not a particularly good pitcher. 234 expected ISO to lefties this year, 304 actual ISO, 167 actual ISO to righties, 188 expected ISO, only striking out 16.5% of hitters overall, 10.4% walk percentage, 1.9 home runs per 9 innings. The guy is very, very bad.
Yeah, it's no real redeeming factors there for Jonathan Heasley, one of the worst pitchers on the slate. So Diamondbacks, team I'm pretty sure I'll be getting to. Now, the next game on the slate, a lot of people are going to be getting to: Colorado Rockies, Texas Rangers. It's the Coors Field game. And a lot of ownership is going to Texas, which is never surprising. Road game in Coors Field. Herman Marquez, 4.73 expected ERA, 18.6% K rate. While I do think the Rangers are ultimately a team that makes some semblance of sense, I don't think I'm going to be getting to the 15% mark, because Herman Marquez isn't that terrible, and the Rangers offense isn't that good either. So I think there's other offense I'm going to prefer to get to, particularly in single entry, and then I'm going to be mixing in more of these Texas lefties in single entries, guys like, you know, Corey Seager, and then maybe whoever else ends up being in there for cheaper, like Nate Lau for salary savings. But I'm going to be lighter on Texas in the field in all likelihood. What do you make of the 15% projected ownership?
I assume I'll be a little bit lighter. This strikes me as a spot where I'm probably mixing these guys into lineups more so than I'm full stacking. This isn't quite the same as a lot of these other road team in Texas spots that we've gotten. The Rangers are still certainly underpriced. You know, Semien and Seager's and Garcia's prices are reasonable, but there's no reason Nathaniel Lowe is $3,600 in Coors. You shouldn't have a 2K Cole Calhoun or Brad Miller. You just shouldn't have 2K hitters really anywhere, but especially in Coors. So they're still cheap, but like not to say that implied run totals are the end all be all, because they're not. And I think if anything, they probably get a little bit overstated in DFS. But in a lot of these games where you were getting like crazy ownership going to the cheap visiting team in Coors, you were talking about teams that had like 6.5 implied run totals while everybody else was at like 5 or less. Here you have the Rangers at 5.1, which is high, but it's in line. I mean, it's behind the Astros. It's in line with a lot of other, you know, good offenses on this slate. So I think that is keeping the ownership in check a bit. And it's also just going to make it a little bit easier for me not to necessarily be jamming these guys in everywhere like you kind of felt like you were forced to when you were getting like the Dodgers there or the Giants there. And it was just like, this is clearly the number one offense and also the top value. Here it's like, this is a good offense and a good value, but not quite the same, you know, ridiculous situations that we were getting before.
They also have a 5.1 implied team total. Like, that's not crazy high. Those spots that you were just talking about, I think the Dodgers had run totals over 7 in those games, and the Giants were like, what, 6.6, 6.7. 5.1 is pretty modest. It's high, but it's not even close to the highest on the slate or anything.
Right, exactly. Which, like, and it's kind of like a catch-22 when you talk about it in terms of DFS, because it does pull down that ownership.
Yeah.
But it also, right now, they do still look like they're going a bit over-owned, and it does just make it a little bit easier. Like, because on those other slates, the pricing was like so bad, and the other teams looked so good that it really just came down to like, how do I get away from them? Because I'm going to be playing a lineup where my pitching isn't as good, my one-offs aren't as good, and my stack isn't as good as what the field is doing. Here, it's more like it's going to be a lot closer in terms of projection goes if you get away from them.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with them later in the day. As of right now, other offense I'm going to be prioritizing, like the Toronto Blue Jays and other teams that I have higher implied team totals and just a fraction of the ownership. Then starting for Texas, Dane Dunning is on the mound. He's been decent this year, 4.15 expected ERA, 20.5% K rate, but he's going into Coors Field, which could always be problematic. If I'm taking one side of the Colorado game, I'm leaning towards the Rockies. They have a higher implied team total than the Texas Rangers. They have less than half the ownership, and the spot against Dane Dunning is about comparable to the spot against Herman Marquez. The Rockies, they are better against left-handed pitching than right-handed pitching, but it's Coors Field where they don't have a crazy amount of ownership. And I generally like prioritizing the Colorado Rockies when they're at home and they're just not all that owned, and the team against them is really popular. So the Rockies, it's a team that I think I'll be overweight to as of now.
Yeah, I'm with you on the Rockies too. They're a team that I generally like the idea of getting to when they're not popular, but even more so on this slate, they're actually favored at home. They have the higher implied run total, like you said. Dane Dunning's not a bad pitcher, but he's still pitching in Coors. And even though the Rockies are a little bit more expensive than Texas, like functionally, I don't think it's going to matter that much. Like you have Charlie Blackmon at 4,800, Rogers is 51. Grichuk is 45, McMahon's 46, but then you have Montero at 2,800. You have Sam Hilliard at 2,400. You can use those guys to balance out salaries a bit. And then kind of like we've talked about in other spots, pricing across the board just isn't going to be sharp enough that it matters that much. Like if it's costing you a little bit more to get to the Rockies as a 5-man stack than the Rangers, you're probably going to be able to offset that pretty easily by just going a little bit cheaper with a secondary stack or with whatever one-offs you use without sacrificing too much in the way of upside. So at their current ownership, when you compare, the Rockies right now getting 6.5% ownership to Texas getting 15%, I really like getting to the Rockies.
Yeah, a spot where, once again, I've watched them a lot in this spot because we get these games where the field gets so fixated on the opposing team going into Colorado that Colorado itself kind of gets overlooked when they have the same exact park benefit. So the Rockies right around 6.5% ownership. Sign me up. It's a team I'll be on. A few games left here to talk about. The next one, the San Diego Padres against the Cleveland Guardians. On the mound for San Diego, Mike Clevinger, 4.07 expected ERA, 21% K rate. He's been good this year, but at the same time, there's better pitchers. Cleveland's fairly tough to strike out. This is going to be one of those spots where I don't really like either side all that much.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Clevinger is a solid pitcher, but like you were saying, the Guardians are very difficult to strike out. Right now, we have Clevinger getting about 1% ownership, so he's somebody that I would certainly say is under-owned, but also just a 6% chance of being a top 2 pitcher, 5% chance of being a top 2 value. I think the issue I run into is just that Clevinger is going to be close enough in salary to guys like Suarez and Fried, not to mention that upper tier of guys, that I'm probably just going to end up getting there more frequently.
Yeah, that's where I'm at here as well. Just 15 games. We can't play every single spot. This is one of the spots where I'm pretty cool with leaving off. But on the other side, Aaron Savali's pitching for Cleveland. Hasn't been terrible this year. Hasn't been great either, but solid middle of the rotation pitcher, 4.27 expected ERA, 23.7% K rate. But here's what stands out to me about the Padres. Nobody's playing them anymore. Less than 1% projected ownership as a team. They still have a lot of firepower with Juan Soto added to the mix in the middle of the lineup. So I think this is a team, considering what their ownership is, if they're going to be sub 1% owned, I have interest in them at home against Aaron Savali because it seems like the Padres are kind of getting written off a little bit.
I'm confused by like every single number about the Padres right now. Like I get Savali's not bad, 3.76 xFIP, 23.7% strikeout percentage, but the 4.1 implied run total just seems, I don't know, kind of low. Just me looking at it. I'm not looking at like a model that tells me it's low or anything. It just seems lower than I would expect. The lack of ownership seems pretty crazy, but then also we only have them with like a 3% chance of being, or 2.5% chance of being the top stack. All of that just, I don't know, it seems low to me. It seems like people are kind of sleeping on the Padres when they shouldn't be. Obviously, chances are I'm wrong there because it's a bunch of different numbers that line up and I disagree with. But like, I'm with you, just the idea of being able to get to this team at low ownership. The one thing that makes it relatively unlikely that in practice I actually get there is that they are really expensive. And I think they are expensive enough where it probably is going to impact what you can do with the rest of your lineup. Like you're talking about a $6,300 Juan Soto, a $6,200 Machado, $5,600 Drury, $5K Josh Bell. It's a lot of really expensive guys back to back to back to where you are going to have to sacrifice somewhere else in your lineup. Whereas with a lot of other good teams on this slate, you're not going to have to.
Yeah. And that could be a case when I build lineups. I just don't get to them in the lineup builder because the opportunity cost of pitching is too great. But at least just looking at the numbers early in the morning, Padres is a team that I would like to get to because this offense has so much talent in it. I have to believe they're going to figure it out at some point. And people say like, oh, the chemistry is what does chemistry matter in baseball? It's just guys, individuals hitting a baseball. And it's just been some bad variance for them since making the trade for Josh Bell and Juan Soto. I think they're going to be fine going forward. I'm willing to take shots at them when they're less than 1% owned as a team.
Yeah, like I like the idea of it. I just doubt that I kind of get there because I think that there's a good chance that Padres lineups end up just projecting far enough off of other relatively low owned lineups I can make when you factor in pitching and one offs that it might be kind of tough for me to get there. But again, it's not, if you can build lineups that you like with the Padres, I do think they make sense just in that this is a crazy high upside team that isn't getting ownership.
Yeah. And, there's definitely a possibility. I'll bring it up later on when I'm doing live before lock. If I'm building lineups and the Padres don't show up, that'll be the reason why, just because the opportunity cost of pitching and filling out the rest of the lineup. Next game to talk about, the Oakland A's against the Miami Marlins. And I'm curious where you stand with the Marlins on this slate, because Zach Logue sucks. He has a 6.19 expected ERA, a 15.3% K rate. So the Marlins, they're cheap. They're picking up some ownership. It's also a very pitcher-friendly park in Oakland. I don't know that I'm going to be making 5-man stacks in Miami, but I think this is a team where it makes sense to use one-offs and a secondary stack to fit with some of the more expensive stacks, just to be able to save salary, because I really do like the spot for Miami on paper. Well, it's just a team that I don't normally love making 5-man stacks of, particularly when they're in Oakland.
Yeah, the park sucks. The offense sucks. The opposing pitcher also sucks. So I'm with you as far as using them for some value. Brian Anderson in particular at 2,300 with third base outfield eligibility looks very good to me. Jesus Aguilar, if he's back in the lineup at 2,600, is going to look good. John Birdie gives you stolen base upside. He hasn't been running as much recently, but in general, still you would expect him to run. But he's also really expensive, so he's not exactly serving the purpose that we're talking about with Miami here. But I think Aguilar and especially Brian Anderson look pretty good.
Yeah. And then also in terms of Zach Logue, once again, just the numbers are terrible this year. So a pitcher who I definitely think could be had, and I don't think is going to really find success against any big league team at this point. So a pitcher that I always would prefer to be on the other side of. And then pitching for the Marlins, Pablo Lopez, 3.9 expected ERA, 23.8% K rate. So he's been good. He's got a pretty decent matchup against the Oakland A's today. We just saw Cabrera last night totally dice up Oakland's offense. I think he finished with, was like 8 innings, 8 strikeouts, and 1 run or something like that. So he looked good. And Pablo Lopez, I think, has the ability to do something kind of similar. And where is his ownership at right now? Pablo Lopez. Oh, here is 19%. I think he's the only guy in his price range that I really think is a strong option. There aren't that many guys in the 8K range that really make a lot of sense. 19% might be a little bit more than I want to get to, though.
Yeah, like it's probably a little bit high, but a lot's going to come down to what the rest of your lineup looks like as well. Because, like you were saying, that's kind of just like a deserted price range. I like Kluber at 7,700 a little bit more than you do, but it's still Corey Kluber. Like, you're not getting that excited about him. Pablo Lopez is good. You're getting him outside of Miami, but it's in Oakland, so shouldn't be a huge deal, and it's a good matchup. But outside of those guys, there's just like not much that I would want to move ownership to. So I think both guys are going a little bit over-owned relative to their chances of success. But when you consider that there's gonna just be some lineup builds where you need that price range, and there's not a whole lot else to get to, I'm typically not going to be as concerned about the fact that they individually are over-owned. One alternative, I guess, if you are concerned about their ownership, if you're getting to lineups where like you do need one of those guys, maybe those are the lineups where you consider going to like an unknown Jose Suarez or Austin Voth. But realistically, I think it's just going to be, there's going to be some lineups where I like getting to Lopez. I like getting to Kluber because they're in a price range basically of their own. And it just is going to open up some extra bats. Like if you're going to the Padres, for example, those guys probably start to look a little bit useful.
Super chat from El Negro Loco. Daily reminder to fade Sean V. I don't know who Sean V is playing today, but it's whoever typically does well on a Tuesday at the end of August, and then some numbers that probably don't actually make sense. So I don't know who Sean's playing. I'm sure we'll hear from him later on in the day, and then we'll know for sure which players he's backing for the slate. Next game to talk about, only a couple games left. Next one, Los Angeles Dodgers against the Milwaukee Brewers. Interesting spot for Corbin Burns because he's Corbin Burns. He has really good numbers for you. 32% K rate, 2.82 expected ERA. But he's also on the road against the Dodgers. The Dodgers team total here is 4, so it's not anything too crazy low. And there's a lot of other really good high-end pitchers to consider. Robbie Ray, Carlos Rodon, Justin Verlander, Dylan Cease, Max Fried. We've rattled off a bunch of them. So what is going to be your take on Corbin Burns when he's so low owned today? But it's kind of hard to justify him just relative to the other pitchers if we're looking at it on paper.
Yeah, like I like the ownership. I think he's somebody that you certainly should be looking to if you're playing, for example, like the Rangers and you're trying to offset some ownership, because that upside is still certainly there. It's a brutal matchup, but that's accounted for by the ownership. He has the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate at 32%, 2.9 xFIP. Right now, I have him the lowest projected of the top tier pitchers, which I think is normal and not surprising, but like less than a point behind Cease, 2.5 points behind Verlander, 3 points behind Rodon and Ray. So certainly behind them, but from a range of outcome standpoint, not totally different. So, I do think he's the least favorite guy of that group, but also, we have him with a 16.6% chance of being a top two pitcher. For reference, that's higher than we have Dylan Cease. Not that I personally agree with that, but it's at least a reasonable stand, and he's getting even less ownership. So I think in tournaments you can make a case for Burns. I probably would just get the Cease first.
Yeah, and then other side of the game, it's going to be Tony Gonsolin, expected ERA 3 flat. He is a 24% K rate. Gonsolin, he's been solid overall on the year. He's at home. It's a pitcher-friendly park going up against the Brewers. I don't want to pay up for Gonsolin. We have this many pitching options, but another guy good enough, I'm not going to be stacking against him with the Brewers either.
Yeah, Gonsolin is good. We talked about him a lot this year that he's likely to regress, but it's not to regress to being bad. It's just to regress to being like good instead of exceptionally good. 3.71 xFIP, 24% strikeout percentage, doesn't give up much power. Really difficult for me to make a case for the Brewers here.
Yeah, a lot of teams to get to. They are almost certainly not going to be in my player pool. And now, final game on the slate to talk about, Robbie Ray at home against the Washington Nationals. One of the most popular pitchers on the slate, and it totally makes sense to me. I know Robbie Ray has had his up and downs this year, but still, he's a 28.5% K rate. The Nationals offense, one of the worst in baseball, if not the worst in baseball right now, that they no longer have Josh Bell or Juan Soto. I don't really see any reason to not like Robbie Ray in this spot. The only talking point would be how much exposure do we want to get to him.
Yeah, like if you're going to nitpick on Ray, I think the negative would be that the Nats lineup is likely to be almost entirely right-handed outside of CJ Abrams. Ray has struck out 26.6% of righties compared to 36.8% of lefties. So it is nice when you can mix a few lefties in there. But these are, for the most part, going to be below average right-handed hitters in a very favorable pitcher's park. And Ray's not quite as expensive as some of the other top-tier pitchers. So still think he looks really good, all things considered. He's the highest owned pitcher on the slate right now. Probably should be. Like I said, I have him projected basically the same as Carlos Rodon and higher than everybody else. So at that price tag, I do think he looks really good. I do think that also when you look at chances of success, when you look at like the top two pitcher percentage, for example, he's basically the same as Rodon. He's slightly ahead of Verlander, a little bit more ahead of Burns and Cease. But when you compare the ownership, I think it's reasonable to say maybe like you play a little bit less Ray, a little bit more Cease and or Burns. But I also wouldn't fault anyone for just being more different with offenses and playing more Ray.
Yeah, I mean, it's as good of a spot for Robbie Ray as it is for anybody. Play him in cash games. I know a lot of people are going to look at all the top pitchers and they're going to say, who do we play in cash games today? Robbie Ray is certainly one of the answers on DK. And then FanDuel, I think he's also very much the right answer. 10,600, 25% projected ownership. So would you agree with that? Robbie Ray is the obvious cash consideration?
Yeah, I can actually, I think I uploaded projections. Oh, nope, I got distracted, so I don't have them. I was going to run like my top 100 lineups, but
Okay.
I hadn't uploaded them. But yeah, I would expect that Ray is in there.
Yeah, so Robbie Ray, I think he's the safest pitcher on the slate on the high end. Other side of the game, Eric Fetty's pitching for Washington, 5.02 expected ERA, 17.1% K rate. He's been not particularly great this year. So the Mariners, it is a pitcher friendly park in Seattle. They have a 4.8 implied team total. So this isn't going to be a team that I put amongst the likes of the Toronto Blue Jays or the Colorado Rockies, but the Mariners are another team that are going to be in my player pool, team that I'm going to be making stacks of.
Yeah, they're mildly appealing. The park sucks, but like you said, they do still have a 4.8 implied run total. Fetty's just kind of a middle of the road guy. Julio Rodriguez obviously is really good. The thing that makes it kind of difficult to get to him on a slate of this size is that you're just going to have so many good outfield options, but also good outfield options that don't cost you $6,000. Jesse Winker at 4K is going to look pretty solid. Same goes for Haniger. Don't mind Crawford as a cheap shortstop option. So I think the Mariners look okay, but certainly not my favorite stack.
All right, that is going to do it for us today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't done it already, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Also, if you're playing fantasy football this year, make sure to check out our best ball channels and our fantasy football YouTube channels. Got more information about them in the comment section below. You just go check on that. You click on those links, go and subscribe to those channels. Helps us out a whole bunch. Other than that, guys, check you all later. We'll be here for the deeper dive, live before lock. Check out those shows. Good luck today.